Larry Davis is one of the wildest gangsters to ever come out of New York. Davis was America's most notorious fugitive after he got into a wild shootout with the NYPD and lived to tell the tale. Larry started selling drugs at a young age, but after his pregnant girlfriend had a miscarriage due to crack, he decided he wanted out of the drug game. Larry then ran off on his plug for a large amount of money. The only problem was that Larry's plug was the New York City Police Department. As a young boy, Larry had been recruited into the drug game by crooked cops. They gave him drugs to sell, and it was said the crooked cops even made Larry rob and kill drug dealers for them too. But after Larry ran off with their money, the crooked cops were furious and decided that Larry had to go. It wasn't only that he ran off with their money, but he was also now a liability. Larry simply knew too much. However, there was another problem the crooked cops didn't know about. Larry knew the police were after him, and despite only being 20 years old at the time, he wasn't going to go down without a fight. So when the cops came knocking at Larry's apartment door one winter day in 1986, Larry was on the other side, ready for war. Larry then turned his little Bronx apartment into the last scene of Scarface, saying, "Say hello to my little friend." But the only difference between Larry and Tony Montana was that when the gun smoke cleared, Larry had shot 6 cops before escaping into the night uninjured and now America's most wanted man. The shootout would make every major newspaper as the entire country would soon hear about the 20-year-old drug dealer from the Bronx who refused to bow down to the police. So let's get straight into the story of Larry Davis, an underworld icon. If you're enjoying this video, don't forget to hit that subscribe. Larry Davis was born on May 28, 1966, the youngest of at least a dozen children. Larry's parents were originally from Georgia and later relocated to the High Bridge section of the Bronx. Larry's father worked as a plumber while his mother stayed at home to take care of the kids. Everything seemed normal until Larry turned 10. When Larry was 10 years old, his father walked out on the family, leaving his mother to raise Larry and his siblings on her own. This would have been hard on any woman, but Larry's mother was different. With her husband now gone, it's said that she opened up her own store to provide for her kids. His mother was also well loved and respected in the neighborhood. A big reason why is because Larry's mother would look after the other kids in the neighborhood. If a kid came from a broken home or had no place to stay, Larry's mother would take them in and look after them, despite the fact that she was already a single mother raising a dozen-plus kids of her own. This kindness may be explained by the fact that Larry's mother was a church-going woman. She would often bring Larry to church with her. Church would also be where Larry found his first real passion: music. As a young boy, Larry learned to play multiple instruments, including the piano and the organ. As he got older, he would even start his own recording studio and record label, which was at a time when most people didn't do things like that. In addition to music, Larry would also develop a real interest in motorcycles and cars. That's all to say that from the outside looking in, Larry seemed like a normal kid in his early years. But beneath the surface, something was going on with him. After his father left around the time he was in 5th grade, Larry would start getting into trouble. He would be kicked out of multiple schools and quickly grew into a problem child. Things escalated quickly. By the time he was 14, Larry had dropped out of school, hitting the block full-time. Between 1980 to 1986, he was arrested numerous times for all types of crimes ranging from robbery to violent crime. Larry would quickly build a reputation for himself in the streets as someone who was violent, fearless, and crazy. There's even an urban legend that many people often tell about exactly how crazy Larry was. The story goes that Larry once tortured a dog, killed it, and then cooked it in his skillet on the stove. Stories like this were the reason why Larry was given the nickname Local Larry, and he really lived up to that name. During that same time period, between 1980 to 1986, Larry would be named as the prime suspect in at least 7 drug-related murders. That's right, as a teenager, police suspected Larry had up to 7 bodies. Larry's friends also knew that he was involved in some serious stuff. He would regularly get phone calls and visits from strange people. These strangers were often older white men. When they called, Larry would tell everyone that he had to leave for a minute and that nobody else could come with him. When they would pay Larry a visit, they'd barge into his house uninvited and demand to speak to Larry alone in another room. What was happening with Larry? How did he transform from that ordinary church-going kid into a full-blown gangster? everyone in America would find out the answer after police would show up to an apartment building in the Bronx on a cold night in November 1986. On November 19, 1986, at around 8:30 p.m., a group of 27 police officers descended on an apartment building in the Bronx. The address was 1231 Fulton Avenue. 15 of the officers started by surrounding the building, covering all exits, including the fire escapes in nearby alleyways. With the building now surrounded, the remaining 12 officers went inside through the front door. Once inside, 3 of them stayed back while the 9 remaining officers shuffled to a unit on the first floor. The unit they had come to raid was Unit 1A. The unit was being rented by a woman named Regina Lewis. Lewis was living there with her husband and their 3 young children, but the police weren't there for them. The police were instead there looking for Lewis's brother, Larry Davis. The police wanted to bring the then 20-year-old Larry in for questioning. 4 drug dealers had been found murdered in the Bronx, and Larry was the prime suspect in the case. At that time, he had been staying between his mom's house, his girlfriend's house, and his sister Regina's apartment. 3 days before the police came, Larry had shown up at his sister's home unexpectedly in the middle of the night. When his sister opened the door, she initially refused to let him in. She had been getting into arguments with her husband over Larry. Her husband didn't want Larry staying with them because Larry had been stashing drugs and guns at their apartment, the same apartment where their children lived. So when Larry showed up that night demanding to be let in, his sister initially said no. But after his sister refused, Larry then slumped down in the doorway and began crying. This was something totally out of character for him. Larry then began telling his sister that nobody loved him and that everyone wanted to hurt him. His sister could also see that Larry was sweating heavily and that he had blood in his mouth. Something clearly wasn't right. Larry then pulled out a gun, handed it over to his sister, and begged her to put him out of his misery. His sister didn't know it at the time, but Larry knew that the police were after him. He knew that the police were blaming him for the quadruple murder and that they were out looking for him. Larry was terrified, but he never told his sister this. She then let him inside the apartment, and Larry passed out on the couch. Fast forward 3 days later, and the police are now at his sister's front door. They had guns and they were looking for Larry. The police also knew about Larry's reputation. Shortly before arriving at the apartment building that night, a message had been broadcast over the police radio saying, "Use caution." These crazy 9 officers were now in front of Unit 1A, ready to go. But rather than knock and scream police or just kick in the door, the officers instead began turning the handle on the door, trying to sneak their way in. But on the other side of the door was Larry's sister. She noticed the door handle starting to turn. Curious, she got up and cracked open the door. Through the crack in the door, a voice then said to her, who lives here at the same time, her husband was also now paying attention. He got up and walked to the door. Looking through the crack in the door, her husband realized that the voice on the other side was the police. He then opened the door a little wider and began speaking to the officers. However, he was quickly interrupted when one of the officers screamed, "There he is!" Larry was on the couch, now staring directly at the police in the doorway. Realizing it was the police, Larry jumped up and dashed down the back hallway into one of the back bedrooms. At the same time, 7 police officers rushed into the apartment, chasing after him. But what happened next is up for debate. There are 2 different stories of who shot first and who shot back in self-defense. According to Larry, after running into the back bedroom, he noticed his niece and nephew were in the room and quickly pushed them under the bed. A police officer, later identified as Ed McCarran, then bursted into the room. McCarran shouted at Larry, asking him, "Where's the money?" Larry then told McCarran that he had the money and pleaded, "Please don't hurt my family." That's when, according to Larry, McCarran tried to shoot him between the eyes, but Larry luckily leaned his head back and the bullet only grazed his forehead. However, the force of the shot managed to drop Larry to his knees. Fearing for his life, Larry then started shooting back in self-defense. But according to the police, when Larry ran into the back bedroom, he wasn't with anyone else. He was in the room alone. Police also said that Larry was shuffling around as if he were searching for something in the room. The police then ordered Larry to come out of the room with his hands up. However, Larry ignored their commands. According to the police, Larry then turned around and shot Officer McCarran in the face. Believing that Larry was trying to kill them, the police then began shooting back in self-defense. Regardless of whose version of events you believe, the result was an all-out gun battle. Larry may have been outnumbered, but he wasn't underarmed. In the bedroom, he had access to a 20-gauge double-barrel sawed-off shotgun, a .45 caliber semi-automatic pistol, a 9mm Browning semi-automatic pistol, and a .32 caliber Walther PPK semi-automatic pistol. He began unloading on the officers who had followed him into the apartment. For the next 10 minutes, Larry would engage in a back-and-forth shootout with police. As shots rang out, his sister Regina grabbed her kids and took cover on the kitchen floor. She was praying and pleading for it to be over. In the back bedroom, the floor was now slippery, covered in blood from one of the officers. Larry continued to shoot, hitting 6 of the 7 officers who had entered the apartment. 5 of the 6 officers were hit from the neck up. Officer McCarran, who was hit in the head, was the most severely injured. Larry also suffered minor injuries, including a grazed wound to his head and a gunshot wound to his hand. Eventually, Larry fired off all the rounds in his shotgun. Once his gunfire ceased, the injured officers took the opportunity to retreat from the apartment, leaving Larry alone in the back bedroom. That's when Larry noticed that the lock on his neighbor's door had been blown open by a police shotgun blast during the raid. Larry then jumped up, dashed across the hallway, and ran into the neighbor's apartment. From there, he jumped out of the window into the rear courtyard. The rear courtyard was one of the only places that the police had overlooked when surrounding the building. But Larry didn't just run out of the apartment building. Instead, he took a moment to look around the courtyard. Realizing that no one was back there, Larry dashed down into a nearby alleyway. The police didn't notice and never realized that Larry had escaped. Larry managed to escape while the police still had the building surrounded, and within hours of the shooting, Larry Davis was America's most wanted man. The police were furious. They now had the largest manhunt in the city's history since they hunted down David Berkowitz, aka Son of Sam, a decade prior. The New York Police Department dispatched 500 officers to locate and apprehend Larry Davis. They searched in every borough of New York City, and the search extended beyond New York to states such as Illinois and Maryland. A reward of $25,000 was offered for information leading to Larry's arrest, and a dedicated hotline was set up, receiving thousands of tips daily. In their pursuit, the police conducted numerous raids, believing they were closing in on Larry multiple times. However, each time they thought they had him cornered, he managed to slip through their fingers. The media frenzy surrounding the case was immense. Larry's face was plastered on the front pages of newspapers, and his story was the lead on nightly news broadcasts. The narrative painted a picture of a violent, unhinged man who had no qualms about shooting police officers. But the media also began to uncover Larry's claims of police corruption, adding layers of complexity to the story. As Larry eluded capture, the public became more intrigued by his audacity and the potential truth behind his allegations. Despite the massive manhunt, Larry managed to evade capture for 17 days. During this time, he relied on a network of friends and family to hide him. Larry's supporters, some of whom were terrified of the repercussions, risked their safety to help him. Larry would force his way into their homes at gunpoint, demanding shelter, food, and transportation. He moved stealthily from one location to another, never staying in one place for too long. His familiarity with the Bronx's layout and his street smarts gave him an advantage over the police. On December 6, 1986, Larry decided to seek refuge at the Twin Parks housing project, where another sister lived. However, tips soon reached the police, informing them of his whereabouts. As officers surrounded the building, Larry took a neighbor hostage, demanding the man to call his girlfriend and mother and to get him some Chinese food. The terrified neighbor complied, but also managed to alert the police of Larry's location. The situation escalated into a hostage crisis. Larry, knowing he was cornered, made demands for a helicopter to fly him to Washington, D.C., where he planned to address the media and expose the police corruption he had witnessed. Negotiations with the police stretched through the night, with Larry refusing to surrender without guarantees for his safety. After 17 tense hours, Larry finally agreed to give himself up, under the condition that he would not be harmed. As he emerged from the apartment, escorted by police officers, a crowd of onlookers chanted his name, viewing him as a symbol of resistance against police oppression. Larry, ever defiant, shouted, "I've been selling drugs and guns for the cops." His arrest marked the end of one of the most intense manhunts in American history. But it was only the beginning of a long legal battle. Larry Davis faced numerous charges across 4 separate cases. Starting with the shootout, he was charged with 9 counts of attempted murder, 6 counts of aggravated assault, 8 counts of criminal weapons possession, and 2 counts of criminal weapons possession, and 2 counts of criminal use of a firearm. In addition, he faced charges for the quadruple murder, 2 other individual murder cases, and a kidnapping charge while on the run. Due to threats from correctional officers, Larry was transferred to a federal detention center for his safety. Larry's first trial for the quadruple murder began in December 1987. Despite the prosecution's strong case, including witness testimonies and physical evidence, Larry's defense argued that he was framed. They presented an alibi and claimed the police used this case to justify the shootout raid. After 9 days of deliberation, the jury found Larry not guilty on all charges, a stunning legal upset. Larry's second trial for the police shootout was equally controversial. Jury selection faced accusations of racism, leading to 2 mistrials. The final jury consisted of 10 Black and 2 Latino jurors. Larry's defense strategy focused on self-defense, arguing that the police intended to kill him due to his knowledge of their corruption. They highlighted Larry's possession of police business cards and the widespread corruption within the NYPD. The most compelling evidence came from a complaint filed by Larry's mother, documenting threats from the police before the shootout. The jury had to determine if Larry reasonably believed the police were about to use deadly force against him, and if that belief was objectively reasonable. After 38 hours of deliberation, the jury acquitted Larry on all charges. The courtroom erupted in celebration as Larry's supporters praised the verdict, marking the end of one of the most dramatic legal battles in New York history. But Larry's legal troubles were far from over. He still faced trials for the other murder cases and the kidnapping charge. His defense team, buoyed by the previous victories, continued to argue that Larry was a victim of police corruption and a scapegoat for the department's failures. However, the tide began to turn against Larry as the prosecution built stronger cases for the remaining charges. In the subsequent trials, Larry was convicted of multiple charges, including murder and kidnapping. Despite the earlier acquittals, these convictions ensured that Larry would spend the rest of his life behind bars. His story, however, remained a powerful example of the complexities and contradictions within the American justice system. Larry Davis's saga captured the nation's attention not only for the sheer audacity of his actions, but also for the deeper issues it exposed. The case highlighted the systemic corruption within the NYPD and the lengths to which individuals might go to survive in a world where the lines between criminals and law enforcers were often blurred. Larry's story became a symbol of resistance for many in the Black community, who saw in him a figure fighting against an oppressive system. While Larry Davis's life was marked by violence and criminality, it also served as a stark reminder of the failures of the institutions meant to protect and serve. His legacy is a complicated one, filled with contradictions and moral ambiguities. Larry Davis, the man who shot 6 police officers and evaded capture in a dramatic fashion, remains an indelible part of American criminal history. His story is a testament to the extremes of human behavior, both in the pursuit of justice and in the depths of corruption. The story of Larry Davis doesn't end with his legal battles. His life behind bars continued to be as tumultuous and controversial as his time on the streets. Imprisoned, Larry Davis became a complex figure, an emblem of resistance and a lightning rod for discussions on justice, race, and police corruption. His presence in the prison system added new chapters to his already infamous saga. Once incarcerated, Larry was not content with a quiet existence. He quickly made a name for himself within the prison walls, continuing to defy authority and maintain his reputation as a fearless and unyielding individual. Larry's notoriety preceded him, and his fellow inmates saw him as a legend who had stood up to the police and lived to tell the tale. His defiance earned him respect among some inmates, but it also made him a target for others, including prison guards who were all too aware of his history. Larry's time in prison was marked by numerous incidents and altercations. He was involved in several violent confrontations with other inmates, which only solidified his reputation as a dangerous and volatile figure. Despite the constant threat of violence, Larry managed to survive in the harsh environment of the prison system. His survival skills, honed on the streets of the Bronx, served him well behind bars. However, Larry's most significant impact in prison was not through violence but through his persistent fight against the system. He became an outspoken critic of the prison industrial complex, often speaking out about the inhumane conditions and the systemic issues that plagued the American justice system. Larry's unique position, having been both a notorious criminal and a symbol of resistance against police corruption, gave him a platform that few other inmates possessed. Larry wrote numerous letters and articles from prison, detailing his experiences and the injustices he witnessed. He became a voice for those who felt oppressed by the system, advocating for prison reform and better treatment of inmates. His writings were circulated among activists and garnered attention from outside the prison walls. Larry's ability to articulate the struggles of incarcerated individuals and his first-hand accounts of corruption and brutality resonated with many who were fighting for justice reform. One of Larry's most notable moments in prison came when he organized a hunger strike to protest the conditions of the facility where he was being held. The strike drew significant attention, both from the media and from prison authorities. Larry's demands included better living conditions, access to medical care, and the reduction of violence within the prison. The hunger strike highlighted the dire situation faced by many inmates and put pressure on the prison administration to address these issues. Larry's defiance and activism did not go unnoticed by the authorities. He was often subjected to solitary confinement and other forms of punishment in an attempt to silence him. However, these measures only seemed to strengthen his resolve. Larry continued to fight against the injustices he saw, earning him a reputation as a troublemaker among the prison staff but a hero among many inmates and activists. Despite the challenges he faced, Larry's spirit remained unbroken. He continued to advocate for change and used his position to draw attention to the broader issues of police corruption, racial injustice, and the failures of the American justice system. His story became a rallying point for those who believed in the need for systemic reform, and his legacy continued to inspire long after his death. Larry Davis's story also inspired various forms of media, including documentaries, books, and even fictionalized accounts. His life and actions were examined from multiple perspectives, each trying to understand the man behind the headlines. Was Larry a ruthless criminal who deserved his fate, or was he a product of a corrupt system, a man pushed to the edge by forces beyond his control? The answer perhaps lies somewhere in between, reflecting the complexities and contradictions of his life. Larry Davis passed away on February 20th, 2008, after being fatally stabbed by another inmate. His death marked the end of a life filled with violence, defiance, and controversy. However, his legacy lived on, continuing to spark debates about justice, race, and the role of police in society. Larry Davis remains a figure who defied easy categorization, a man whose life story serves as a mirror reflecting the broader issues and struggles within American society. The tale of Larry Davis is a vivid illustration of the American criminal justice system's most troubling aspects. It exposes the systemic corruption within law enforcement, the harsh realities of life in the streets, and the brutal conditions of the prison system. Larry's story is a testament to the extremes individuals might go to in their quest for survival and justice, and it forces us to confront the uncomfortable truths about the society we live in. The story of Larry Davis is not just about one man, it's about a system that allowed someone like Larry to exist in the first place. It raises questions about the role of law enforcement, the impact of systemic corruption, and the challenges faced by marginalized communities. Larry Davis's life and actions compel us to look deeper into the issues of race, justice, and the American dream, revealing a darker side that is often overlooked. The legacy of Larry Davis continues to be felt today. His story is a reminder of the need for ongoing reform and the importance of holding those in power accountable. It serves as a call to action for those who believe in justice and equality, urging us to continue fighting for a system that truly serves and protects all members of society. Larry Davis may be gone, but his impact endures, a lasting testament to the power of resistance and the quest for justice. In the years following Larry Davis's death, his story has continued to be a subject of study and discussion in academic circles, particularly in the fields of criminal justice, sociology, and African American studies. Scholars have examined his life and the broader social and political context in which he operated, using his case as a lens to explore the intersections of race, crime, and law enforcement in America. Documentaries and films about Larry Davis have sought to present a balanced view of his life, acknowledging his criminal activities while also highlighting the systemic issues that contributed to his downfall. These portrayals aim to provide a more nuanced understanding of Larry's actions and the environment that shaped him. They delve into the socioeconomic conditions of the Bronx in the 1980s, the widespread corruption within the NYPD, and the struggles faced by Black communities in urban America. Books and articles continue to be written about Larry Davis, each offering new insights and perspectives on his life and legacy. Some authors have approached his story from a legal standpoint, analyzing the trials and the legal strategies employed by both the defense and the prosecution. Others have focused on the psychological aspects of Larry's behavior, attempting to understand the motivations behind his violent actions and his unyielding defiance. Larry's story has also inspired works of fiction, with authors using his life as a basis for characters and plots that explore similar themes of resistance, corruption, and survival. These fictional accounts, while not always accurate in their details, capture the essence of Larry's struggle and the broader societal issues it represents. Activists and community organizers continue to invoke Larry Davis's name in their efforts to address police brutality and systemic injustice. His story serves as a potent symbol of the need for accountability and reform within law enforcement. Larry's legacy is particularly relevant in the context of the Black Lives Matter movement and other initiatives aimed at combating racial discrimination and advocating for the rights of marginalized communities. Educational institutions have incorporated Larry Davis's case into their curricula, using it as a case study to teach students about the complexities of the criminal justice system. Law schools, in particular, have found his trials to be valuable examples of the challenges and ethical dilemmas faced by defense attorneys and prosecutors. Courses on criminal justice and race relations often include discussions about Larry's life, encouraging students to critically examine the factors that contribute to crime and the ways in which the justice system can be improved. In popular culture, Larry Davis's story has taken on a mythic quality. He is often referenced in music, particularly in hip-hop, where artists draw parallels between his struggle and their own experiences with systemic oppression. Songs and lyrics mentioning Larry Davis highlight his defiance and resistance, portraying him as a symbol of strength and resilience in the face of adversity. The public's fascination with Larry Davis reflects a broader interest in stories of outlaws and anti-heroes, individuals who challenge authority and disrupt the status quo. Larry's life, with its dramatic twists and turns, captures the imagination and elicits a range of emotions, from admiration to condemnation. His story serves as a reminder of the thin line between heroism and villainy, and the ways in which society often blurs these distinctions. Ultimately, the story of Larry Davis is a powerful narrative that forces us to confront the realities of the American criminal justice system. It challenges us to question the role of law enforcement, the impact of systemic corruption, and the ways in which race and poverty intersect with crime. Larry's life and legacy compel us to reflect on our own beliefs about justice and accountability and to strive for a system that is fair and equitable for all. In conclusion, Larry Davis's life is a testament to the complexities of the human experience and the broader societal issues that shape our world. His story is one of defiance and resistance, but also survival and resilience. It serves as a powerful reminder of the need for ongoing reform and the importance of holding those in power accountable. Larry Davis may be gone, but his legacy endures, a lasting symbol of the fight for justice and the quest for a better world. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment for more videos.